Yes, so I'm Matt Marino at WePay. Looks like we got a good intimate group for this session. And yes, the title is Why I Can't Generate Revenue with a Million Sales Reps. No, you're not here to talk about how I suck at recruiting. This has all to do about our journey within the sales organization. And yes, we're at a customer success summit, so spoiler alert, like we ended up going with a customer success framework. But I think how we got there, our evolution, might surprise some folks and hopefully provide some motivation for how you all think about the right sort of institutional change that you should fight for within your own organization. So really, yeah, as Val mentioned, we've got 20 minutes of prepared content. I'm essentially just going to share the WePay story and then allow for some Q&A afterwards. So to get started, I was living in Australia 3 years ago working for Visa Merchant Solutions team. Got a call from a CFO that I used to work with about this small company called WePay. They had about 80 employees. They had just raised, I don't know, 50 million in their Series D. And they were looking for somebody to come join their sales organization. And I was scratching my head, a bit reluctant at first because I was with this large, giant organization that was really safe and secure, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to hop back into the startup environment. But having been in payments for 15 years, I quickly really fell in love with their business model because essentially what WePay does is provides payments for platforms. So we define a platform as any software application that needs to move money and process payments for their users. So, for example, Uber is a platform. Their drivers are merchants, and their buyers are passengers. Airbnb would be a platform. Their buyers are the folks looking to find a place to stay, and their sellers are going to be the homeowners. GoFundMe is another example of a platform. And so what I really liked about WePay was like they served this niche very, very well. But I had a lot to really learn about their revenue model and like what was really expected to accelerate our growth. So I first started with like understanding not only like the company's culture, but like what was the company's value discipline. So this concept of a value discipline, I think this was written by Michael Tracy in his book, The Discipline of Market Leaders, which is a really kind of basic but profound example of how the best organizations rally all of their effort around one of three value disciplines. So at the top, you have organizations that focus on building and innovating the best product. So folks like Apple or Tesla or Johnson & Johnson or Nike are all innovators in their respective fields. In the lower left, you have organizations that through rigor in optimizing their supply and distribution chain, are able to deliver a product or service that is extremely inexpensive. So firms like Dell Computer, Walmart, American Airlines would be an example of that. And then the lower right are organizations that look at the total lifetime value of a client and look beyond just a single transaction, but think about how do we serve these clients in the best way with the best total solution. So examples here would be Nordstrom's, Four Seasons, Home Depot, and WePay. So then I got to understand, like, okay, like what is the revenue model that I'm walking into? And for most sales, if you sell something, so say a sales rep sold something in January for $48,000, it's really easy to recognize that revenue. It's really easy to pay that person. It's really easy to forecast because you know kind of the type of deals that they're working on. With most SaaS companies, they're selling things on some sort of like monthly recurring type fee. So if that same rep, say, sold some software in January and the contract was $4,000 a month, that provides some sort of recurring, predictable revenue, which is great for finance and also relatively easy to forecast and develop plans around. What I walked into at WePay was a very odd revenue model in that we had a team of people closing deals, so it took like 6 to 12 months to close a deal, and then the client had to integrate our solution, so then they did that for another few months, and then they finally launched, But our revenue model, we did not charge any sort of setup fees or monthly fees. It was just based on a per transaction. And so we were really only as successful as our clients' ability to generate revenue from their merchants processing. And so like what was awesome is that once they were live, there was this compounding effect month over month of growth. But we had this really long lag that made it very difficult to forecast for. And so the entire sales and marketing team was maybe around 11 people when I joined. And there were, I think, 5 or 6 in sales. This is one of them. This is Brian. This is one of the first guys I met who I inherited onto the team. Brian's title was account executive. And I'll walk through everything that he was doing. So he was generating leads. So he was identifying prospects, scouring LinkedIn, cold calling, attending trade shows, managing email campaigns on Tout App and SalesLoft. But he was also creating his own content. And God bless him, like he was hustling, right? Like he was creating his own clever ROI documents in Excel and his own pitch decks, his own marketing collateral. He was closing deals, so he was getting those prospects through the sales process, deciding on a solution, negotiating a contract, negotiating a rate. But wait, there's more. He was also then responsible for taking partners live, managing the integration, managing the communication with the sales engineers, managing the product team at the client. But then also he was managing them post-contract being signed. So like even he had accounts in his portfolio that he had for like 2 or 3 years that were like running dormant. So you can see here that Brian was doing quite a lot. Anyone want to guess where Brian was getting paid? How his commission plan was structured? It was on closing deals. So we were getting a lot of deals in, which was great. But again, based on our revenue model, if those deals don't go live, we're not generating revenue as a business. And so, I mean, I think it's helpful context that sales, whether you're a salesperson selling software or real estate or insurance or whatever, it's going to vary tremendously based on the type of organization, the product, the size, and your company goals. And I would argue that sales is the most contextually dependent job in business. One thing that is consistent, though, is that sales is ultimately a boundary-dependent job. Meaning that Brian, what he was doing, he was the communication channel between his prospects and everyone else at WePay. So everyone at WePay related to finance, management, operations, legal, et cetera. He knew what our strategy was, what our goals were. He had to marry that with the goals and objectives of the client and manage all the different stakeholders, the decision makers, their perceptions of WePay, the folks who were supporters and not supporters. And what I realized over the first year was that this role that we were having him do was much different in the communication than someone who should be a partner success or customer success person. Because customer success is still boundary dependent, but at WePay, and I'm sure at a lot of your organizations, what they are doing with the client changes substantially once they've signed an agreement. And with WePay, it happens to be, okay, like once we get a deal signed, great, but now we need to get that integration live, we need to get certified, we need to enable all these merchants with processing, we need to expand to other geographies, we need to help them market this appropriately. And so I remember being in a meeting with my boss, our CEO, Bill Clerico, and we're thinking like, how do we accelerate our time to revenue? And one of our account managers brought in a prop. It's pretty clever, kind of overused, but she's like, this pot represents a deal that you just closed. Notice that it is worthless. There is no plant in this pot. It is just soil. And it's going to take sunshine and water and nutrients and love and care and attention before it even starts to sprout anything. And that's going to take time. But with enough care and attention, it's actually going to yield substantially more. And so, what we ended up doing, and like this seems so obvious in retrospect, was, I think a lot of organizations, particularly startups, fall prey to this, is when you're small, you hire a bunch of generalists. And then as a firm grows, people become specialized. And then that's just what we did. So we had a dedicated sales development team who did nothing but source leads. We had a dedicated sales account executive team who did nothing but close deals. We then had a partner success team who would take those deals, make sure that they'd get integrated appropriately, and we'd generate revenue. And then probably about a year to a year and a half after that handoff between account executive and partner success, we'd give them like a more traditional account manager. And then like the layer underneath is we had a field technical services team, or you may be familiar with them as sales engineers, who supported all of the different business stakeholders. So the folks in the upper part here, they all own the business relationship, and the sales engineers own the technical. And so with this, our journey map, and this is an actual like from our playbook, like this is what our journey map looks like. So the acronyms here, so AE is account executive, FTS is field technical services, PS is partner success, and then TAM is technical account manager. And effectively what we did is we had all of these very discrete handoffs between the business and technical stakeholders within the broader sales organization to provide more discrete advice, recommendations, guidance to really like aid our partners along this journey. Again, since we knew that like we were only going to be as successful as their viability with processing payments, like we had to nail both the business outcomes as well as a really solid technical integration. And what was interesting is when we first proposed this model, the sales team it's probably split 50-50. Some people said, hell no, like no one's talking to my clients. I've developed these relationships for a year, like only I know who's involved. I should be the one managing them. And the other 50% said, you mean someone else is going to take all these clients from me? Sure, here you go. And so what we had to do was show that there was value in having unique roles doing unique things. And I suppose like any sort of change management, showing micro wins when you're updating and evolving your organization becomes really, really critical. And so, I mean, to kind of get hyper specific, like, we developed like a checklist that the salesperson had to do when they would hand off an account to their partner success person. And again, this is specific to WePay, so maybe it's relevant to your organization, maybe probably not. But really, like what we're trying to get at, what we found being most important was ensuring that the salesperson communicated to the partner success rep what the primary business objectives were that we're trying to solve for as it relates to payments. And then we got into who's all the different titles and organization and the technical rollouts and all that. But we really wanted to keep like what are they solving for at heart. Again, if our value discipline is customer intimacy, like that's what matters most to us, keeping them and ensuring a successful integration. So how did we do? Well, the good thing is like the number of deals improved significantly because the sales team like now could focus on what they should be doing. That's closing business. Our time to close improved because they were less distracted on other things. I ultimately want like salespeople spending more time with fewer opportunities. And this allowed them to do just that. But the result I'm most happy with is that it improved our time to go live by 30%. And in our world, because we have this compounding revenue effect, even just bringing things in 4 or 5 months makes a huge impact on our revenue model. NPS remained strong, attrition was super low, and I guess the icing on the cake for us was like we got acquired, and this was awesome, right? I think that all tech companies are looking for some successful exit, and the fact that the largest financial institution in the U.S. saw value not only in our software, but in our ability to differentiate ourselves from other payment companies through this customer intimate model was super inspiring. Let's see. Oh, and I think and this graph here just shows, so in the past, you can see like the long time to go live and the revenue. And the bottom one shows, again, if we just accelerate that by 4 or 5 months, it makes a very material impact on our business with the revenue that we're able to achieve. So really, yeah, my parting thoughts are first, like, how are you incentivizing reps for the right behavior, right? People respond differently to incentives. Most salespeople respond to money, but there are other factors there about what really motivates people, not only in their comp plan, but in their performance review. But more importantly, like, are you incentivizing the right behavior for what they should be doing? If you have a bunch of generalists who are closing and managing, really think hard about like how you want to incentivize those folks. I mean, I'm a believer now that having the siloed effect is really advantageous, but you've got to be super clear on what those motivating factors are. Like any well-run machine, that's an overused example, but like an engine, right? If it's the gears and the pistons, and I clearly don't know how an engine works, but like if all those things like working together, makes an engine run, so does an effective sales organization that has all of these different codependencies. And so ensuring that there is transparency and line of sight, and most importantly, accountability to people before and after is really key. You need to of course, have a feedback loop to senior management so they can dive into any one of these orgs and see how they're doing. And then the last thing is, and we fell victim to this when we first started, is your customer success framework relationship-based or transactional? And I'd argue that you can have a transactional customer intimate approach, but where you're going to get your wires crossed is if success looks like aligning relationship-based programs and resources to relationship clients, and you have transactional products and services to transactional clients, that's not going to work. And then this is what happened to us initially, was we had like our highest paid, most experienced people working with small transactional clients, and we had to just make a shift to how we served those businesses differently, greater videos online, greater self-help type material, but it's easy to fall into that trap. So really, yeah, I'd leave you with this, and that is to ensure that within your own organizations that your teams really know what that primary value discipline is for your own organization. Because quite frankly, all salespeople want the best product at the best price with the best service. And odds are you're probably not going to have that. And so there inevitably is going to be trade-offs. And so be very discreet with what those trade-offs are going to be so that you can align your strategy to really win the right type of clients and then keep those clients coming back for more. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. At this point, we'd like to open it up to some questions. Does anybody have any? Absolutely.
So my question is, without going into numbers, how did you change the incentives for the salespeople? So because a lot of the times, for the type of businesses that you serve, you cannot really predict their value to you, right? So how do you,
Yes.
how do you go about that?
Yeah, so with a guy like Brian, we knew that just paying him on signed deals wasn't enough, because he could sign a bunch of shitty deals that we knew would never materialize into revenue. And so what we ended up doing was paying him something on when the deal was signed, something when the deal was live, and then an ongoing residual of revenue from that client. So he had a vested interest in still accelerating the time to go live, and knowing that a bulk of his commissions are going to come from revenue from that account.
So was it like a year into he was getting paid, 2 years into?
Well, yeah, I mean, we paid based on milestones. So so when he signed a deal, we paid him then. When the deal launched, we paid him then. And then when the client would ultimately go live and start transacting, that's when we made money. And so we paid him, 12, 18 months based on the revenue tail.
Thank you for a great presentation. When it came down to your talent, and you had mentioned that when you decided to partition your sales reps, some said, hey, that's great, people are going to help me do this work, and the other said, hey, I really like relationships. Did you keep everyone in the same role? Or did you find like, hey, this particular person might be better in the account management as opposed to being the hunter?
Yeah, great question. So it was a combination of keeping some people in their roles, letting some people go or having them leave on their own, and some people like transitioning into partner success based on their own innate skill sets and also what they wanted to be doing at work.
So with the split of the initial rep that closed the deal and then it transitioned to more of an account manager that was there for renewals and growth opportunities, how did you transition that compensation model for your reps? Because in our current organization, that rep, a lot of their opportunities come from upsell and growth. How did you split that from new logo to I guess growth on the install base?
Yeah, great question. So with a guy like Brian, let's say that 40% of his commissions would come from revenue from that client. He would make that commission based on any revenue from the client, be it what he had currently sold or if the partner success person had upsold something. And then for the partner success person, it was based on really just the total value of the partner. And so that way, we're kind of paying people for the same service, but I don't know, it was able to work that way.
Thank you. One more here, and then I'll come to you right after.
You used a phrase a couple times with sales and partner success, boundary dependent. Can you define that a little more?
Yeah, so boundary dependent meaning that I would argue that the primary role of sales or partner success is to be the communication channel and to serve as a boundary conduit between your organization and the clients.
In the pass-off between sales and your customer success people, when does the salesperson stop earning commission, and when does that go over to the customer success person? Does it ever?
Yes. So in our model at WePay, when the sales rep signs a deal, they transition the account usually within a week or two. And so again, they're still getting paid when the deal's signed. But there is a incentive to ensure that handoff is as thorough and well documented as possible, because a large part of their compensation is based on the opportunity going live and then revenue from that client as well. And so, probably a third of his comp was paid on the deal being signed, and then the rest was really paid on activities that he's not responsible for. And that helped ensure, again, going back to this theme of doing right by the client and ensuring that there's accountability so that we're signing the right type of deals.
It seems, without knowing your business, but it seems that a lot of the revenue is generated by usage of the platform once the customer is live. And I'm curious to know, the experience of the partner success team and their actual ability to influence that, because sometimes the revenue, clients say they're going to do something and then they, fall short of what the expectations were, and how much ability the partner success people had or ideas that you had around, helping them to grow the customer base, the existing customer base.
And it's a great question. And one of our initial pitfalls was we'd sign a deal and then a few months would go by and nothing's happening. And all of a sudden, the business stakeholders have left and the technical people aren't integrating, and we're like, hey, we spent all these cycles. And so we adopted this model where, it sounds kind of cheesy, but we needed to have vision lock, where the client knew what was the vision that they wanted to achieve with integrated payments. And everyone at WePay needed to know what that would be too. And we identified the different executive stakeholders at the organization and said, okay, do you agree on these KPIs for the next 12 months? And so finding 1 to 3 executive champions at the organization almost always help driving the project forward, we found. Because if we were dependent on a product manager or a developer, like very rarely would that happen. Like we needed that top-down influence. Yes? Oh. Sorry.
You're a popular person. With the acquisition by Chase, how did your sales organization work with the prospects in your pipeline or accounts that have been just signed, right, and have gone into API to communicate any possible changes?
Yeah, so it's been a whirlwind. I mean, we were acquired 3 months ago, and so now it's like they're injecting a lot more capital into our organization. We're hiring more people. We're still running as WePay, but it means, for me, still operating in what has made us successful in the past, while, like any sort of successful acquisition, how do you maximize leverage, right? And clearly, like, they are a much bigger brand with much more capital, much bigger relationships with other clients that we're trying to leverage to the best of our ability. And we're still figuring that out.
And if you'd like, I should talk to you afterwards, because we actually one of the accounts that was closed.
Okay.
And began API, and then the acquisition happened, and it kind of sent shockwaves through our organization in terms of, will the features that we loved about WePay will still be there, or do we need to start looking for another
WePay,
person
thankfully
or
that
another
hasn't
company?
happened yet, or they're not killing anything or changing anything. If anything, they're letting it say, hey, you guys need to be doing more.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for a great presentation. You mentioned earlier that you're getting specific KPIs in front of the executives and measuring them over time. Where are you putting them? Like, how are you capturing them, storing them, and then are you able to do any benchmarking across them?
Yes. So as part of the handoff between the salesperson and partner success, we have a solutions design document that encompasses both the technical solution, so that the product and engineering people know, okay, like, this is how I want payments to operate on my website or app. But like the first page and a half are really those KPIs. And we review it with the executives before we distribute it to the team. That document is then stored in Salesforce. And we have versioning control so that as things slip or change, we can update it as needed.
Any other questions?
Hey, Matt, just want to say hi. Lily asked me to say hi.
Okay. No.
How much did you have to grow the partner success team and the FDS team before you started seeing the benefits of having that type of a structure?
We had to grow all the teams more or less simultaneously, primarily FTS, because we can go sign a lot more deals, and so that's great, but we need to ensure then that we have the partner success resources who are then trained, knowledgeable on WePay to handle the transition. And so because of the codependencies, if I look back on it, I mean, we essentially hired roles for all of those functions at the same time.
All at the same time, and sort of made them somehow work together and understand how they interact?
Yeah, of course. I mean, they even though they provide their own discrete expertise and functions, what we found is that hiring them in cohorts really helped them learn better together compared to hiring like one guy this week and another 3 weeks later. We often would try to bundle our hiring into like cohorts of every 2 weeks, so that folks would kind of follow along the right sort of training together.
I'm afraid that's all the questions that we can take at this time. Matt, thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
For your time.